On October 28, 1921, North Dakota voters removed Governor Lynn Frazier from office. On the same official election table was a proposal to dissolve the Bank of North Dakota itself. Voters said, no. The governor was gone. The bank survived. That bank still exists. North Dakota remains one of 50, the only American state that owns and operates a bank. Why did voters reject the men who built it, but refuse to kill the bank itself? Frazier was not merely the governor. He was chairman of the three-man industrial commission that controlled the new state bank. The Attorney General and Agriculture Commissioner sat beside him. Voters removed them too. Then came the exact second verdict. 101,353 people voted yes. 105,591 voted no. The bank survived by 4,238 votes. It is tempting to treat this as a strange piece of government machinery, a century-old exception hidden in the middle of the country. But the bank did not begin as quiet machinery. It began as a revolt. Farmers organized against the economic system surrounding wheat. They captured a political party, took over their state government, and made North Dakota enter the banking business. Their opponents fought the plan in elections, newspapers, courts, and financial markets. Within 2 years, the movement's leaders had been thrown from power, and yet the institution they built remained. So the deeper mystery is not simply why North Dakota created a bank. It is how something born as a political insurgency survived long enough to become ordinary financial infrastructure. To understand why a bank became the answer, begin with a farm. In the early 20th century, wheat drove much of North Dakota's economy. A farmer could clear land, borrow for seed and equipment, survive drought, endure winter, and bring a crop to harvest. But producing wheat did not mean controlling what happened next. The grain moved through an elevator. It moved on a railroad. Its price was connected to larger markets outside the state. Credit often came through banks in Minneapolis or Chicago, directly or through local institutions linked to them. At every step stood another gatekeeper. The elevator graded the grain. The railroad set transportation costs. Distant markets helped determine the price. A lender determined whether the farmer could finance another season. The Bank of North Dakota's own history says farm loan rates sometimes rose as high as 12%. That figure came from the institution that would later justify its existence through this story, so it should be understood as part of the bank's historical account. But the larger pressure is not difficult to establish. North Dakota farmers had weak bargaining power inside a chain they did not control. The problem was not that every local banker was an enemy or that every wheat buyer was corrupt. The problem was structural. Even a careful farmer could make nearly every decision on his own land and still be dependent on decisions made far away from it. One bad harvest could require more credit. More credit made the next harvest carry the weight of the last one. If prices fell at the wrong moment, the farm did not become less real. The debt did not become less real either. For years, reformers proposed regulation, cooperative marketing, better grain grading, and changes to railroad and elevator practices. But repeated frustration produced a more radical question. If outside institutions controlled the flow of credit, why should the state merely ask them to behave differently? Why not create another source of power? The man who turned that question into an organization was Arthur C. Townley. Townley did not look like the founder of a durable financial institution. He had farmed, speculated in flax, suffered failure, worked as an organizer, and been dismissed by the Socialist Party. What he understood was not banking, it was grievance, and the distance between a grievance felt privately and a movement capable of acting publicly. In 1915, Townley helped build the Nonpartisan League. The name described its method. Rather than remain a small third party, the League would organize farmers around a platform and compete inside the Republican primary, where the decisive political fight in North Dakota often took place. This was a shortcut through the state's existing machinery. League organizers traveled across the countryside. They sold memberships, gathered names, held meetings, and carried a blunt explanation from farm to farm. Farmers were numerous, but the institutions around them were better organized. If farmers acted as a political bloc, they could use state power to change the terms of the economy. The platform reached beyond a bank. It called for a state-owned mill and grain elevator, reforms in taxation and public services, and greater control over the systems that converted a harvest into income. The League also built its own newspaper, the Nonpartisan Leader. It gave the movement a voice that did not depend on editors who opposed it. Its pages mixed argument, cartoons, accusation, instruction, and political identity. A farmer reading it was not invited to see himself as one isolated borrower. He was invited to see himself as part of a majority that had not yet learned to act like one. The language could be harsh. The claims could be partisan. Townley was a polarizing organizer, not a neutral economist. But the method worked. In 1916, League-backed candidates captured the Republican primary. Lynn Fraser, a farmer from the northeastern part of the state, won the governorship. Townley supplied the organizing engine. Fraser supplied a calmer public face. And the League discovered that it could do something far more consequential than protest the price of wheat. It could govern. Fraser's victory did not instantly give the League everything it wanted. State government had multiple chambers, offices, courts, procedures, and constitutional limits. Opposition did not disappear because one candidate won. But by 1918, the Nonpartisan League dominated North Dakota's state government strongly enough to attempt its industrial program. This was the moment when a campaign promise had to become law: staff, money, and machinery. The League's central idea was ownership. Farmers had spent years asking railroads, elevators, millers, and lenders for better treatment. Now their government would create competing institutions in the name of the state. A state mill and elevator could give grain another route to market. A state bank could hold public deposits, supply credit, and help finance the larger program. To supporters, this was democratic power made economic. The state was not some distant abstraction. It was the legal form of the majority they had organized. To opponents, it was a dangerous concentration of money and politics. A government that ran a bank could direct credit, reward allies, expose taxpayers to loss, and place business decisions inside a partisan machine. Both sides understood that this was more than another agricultural program. A bank sits close to the center of an economy because it does not merely own assets. It decides which promises can be converted into money now. It holds deposits. It extends credit. It influences which projects move and which wait. The League had begun by organizing farmers who felt powerless before that decision. Now it intended to put the decision inside the government it controlled. In 1919, the North Dakota legislature passed Chapter 147. The language was unusually direct. For the purpose of encouraging agriculture, commerce, and industry, the state would engage in the business of banking. The system would be owned, controlled, and operated by North Dakota under the name Bank of North Dakota. This was not a subsidy offered to an existing company. The state itself was entering the business. The bank would be controlled by the Industrial Commission, Governor Fraser, Attorney General William Lemke, and Agriculture Commissioner John Hagan. The commission would also oversee other parts of the League's industrial program. The structure turned political victory into a balance sheet. State funds would give the bank a deposit base. Its powers would allow it to lend and invest. Its purpose tied finance to the development of North Dakota agriculture, commerce, and industry. The law was approved on February 25, 1919. Opponents forced a referendum. On June 26, voters approved the legislation. The bank, therefore, had two kinds of authority: a law passed by the League government and a direct vote from the electorate. Neither authority guaranteed success. Banking depends on confidence. A statute can create an institution, but it cannot command every borrower to trust its judgment, every investor to buy its bonds, or every financial institution to cooperate. A new public bank had to recruit people, establish procedures, assemble capital, handle deposits, and convince the state that its money was safe. And it had to do this while the political battle continued around it. The League had won the right to build. Now it had to prove that a movement built for campaigning could operate a bank. The Bank of North Dakota opened in Bismarck on July 28, 1919. Its initial capital was $2 million. The speed is easy to miss. 5 months separated the governor's approval of the law from the bank's opening day. In that short period, an idea that had traveled through farm meetings and partisan newspapers had become a functioning state institution. But what kind of bank was it? The modern answer can obscure the early ambition. BND was created to use public banking power for state development, and its legal authority was broad. Yet from the beginning, its operating policy also contained a restraint that would become central to its survival. The bank was supposed to assist existing financial institutions, not destroy them. That tension has defined BND ever since. It is owned by the state. State funds are deposited there. The Industrial Commission controls it, but it has not generally developed into a government branch bank competing for every household checking account on every main street. In 1919, none of that balance was settled. Supporters expected the bank to break dependence on outside finance and support farms and state industries. Opponents feared political credit and public risk. Local banks had reason to wonder whether the new institution was a partner, a wholesaler, or a state-backed competitor. The bank's $2 million also had to be understood against the scale of its task. North Dakota's economy depended on agriculture. Farm mortgages and seasonal credit were not small temporary problems. The state industrial program itself required financing. A bank created to transform an economic system could quickly discover that its capital was smaller than its promise. The League had built the institution at remarkable speed. That speed created its own danger. Every delay, disputed bond, disappointing loan, or administrative mistake could be presented not as an ordinary problem in a new organization, but as proof that the entire experiment was reckless. The bank's enemies did not need to seize its vault to weaken it. They could attack the legal authority behind it. They could challenge the bonds connected to the industrial program. They could discourage cooperation. They could question whether public money was being placed at risk. They could make every operational difficulty carry a political cost. This is the difference between creating a bank and making one durable. The law answered who owned BND. It did not answer how quickly the institution could build expertise, establish credit relationships, or survive a run of bad economic conditions. The state deposit requirement gave BND something private startups usually struggle to obtain: a stable relationship with a large depositor. But those deposits also made the political stakes larger. This was not merely investor capital. It was money moving through state government. The bank also sat inside a larger League program whose parts could succeed or fail at different speeds. The state mill and elevator project encountered delay and controversy. When one promise stalled, opponents could use it against the credibility of the others. And the surrounding economy was beginning to turn. World War I had supported high demand and prices for American farm products. When the war ended, that environment did not last. Grain prices fell sharply. Drought hurt parts of North Dakota. Credit tightened. Banks failed. Foreclosures increased. A collapsing farm economy could make the League's case for public finance look more urgent. It could also make every public investment look more dangerous. The Bank of North Dakota had been built as protection against vulnerability. Now it was being tested inside the very kind of distress its founders feared. Before it had time to become ordinary, opposition to the Nonpartisan League cannot be reduced to one villain. There were banks and business interests that opposed state competition. There were newspapers that fought the League. The State Historical Society says the opposition received funding from out-of-state corporations. There were Republicans who believed Townley had captured their party. There were citizens who disliked the League's methods, questioned its competence, or objected to concentrating economic power in the Industrial Commission. Then there was the war. Several League leaders had backgrounds in socialist politics. During and after World War I, opponents attacked the movement's patriotism and portrayed it as radical at a moment when radicalism could be made to sound foreign and dangerous. In late 1918, anti-League forces organized as the Independent Voters Association, the IVA. The IVA did not have to prove that every League institution had failed. It had to convince enough voters that the League government could no longer be trusted with the state. Economic conditions helped. When wheat prices collapsed after the war, farmers suffered, regardless of who controlled Bismarck. A movement that had promised to change the economic balance could now be judged against forces larger than North Dakota. Delays in the state mill gave opponents a visible example of promise outrunning execution. The conflict became personal and bitter. Each side had its newspapers, meetings, and accusations. The League described an entrenched system defending privilege. The IVA described a radical machine risking the public treasury. Some attacks were propaganda, some concerns were substantive. Most voters did not have access to a clean ledger separating the two. What they could see was a state divided, an economy in pain, and a government responsible for new enterprises that had not yet earned the protection of age. In 1920, the IVA took control of one house of the legislature. The League's revolution had stopped advancing. The next contest would decide whether it would be reversed. The recall targeted the three members of the Industrial Commission: Governor Lynn Fraser, Attorney General William Lemke, Agriculture Commissioner John Hagan. These were not random offices. Together they controlled the state-owned industries. Removing them would replace the hands on the machinery. Fraser had once embodied the League's electoral triumph. Now he became the first state governor in American history to be removed through a recall election. The result was devastating for the movement. The voters did not merely reduce a legislative majority, they removed the men who stood at the top of the system. The Nonpartisan League era in North Dakota state government was ending. If the Bank of North Dakota had remained only a Townley slogan, this should have been the moment it disappeared. Its political sponsors were defeated. The opposition had organized successfully. The economy was hostile. The public had been exposed to 2 years of accusations about the League's competence, loyalty, and use of power. And voters were given a direct opportunity to dissolve the bank. This is where the story could have produced one simple verdict: remove the officials, erase the program, return the state to the world that existed before 1919. Instead, the electorate split the decision. The official table is plain. Bank of North Dakota, dissolution. Yes, 101,353. No, 105,591. The margin was 4,238 votes, about 2% of the votes cast on the question. That narrowness matters. The bank did not survive because opposition vanished. Nearly half the electorate voting on the measure wanted it gone. The institution survived in a state still deeply divided over what it represented. It is also important not to pretend the table reveals the private reasoning of every voter. We cannot know that each person carefully separated governor from bank, or that every no vote expressed enthusiasm for public banking. Some may have disliked dissolution more than they liked the institution. Some may have feared wasting what had already been built. Some may have supported parts of the League program while rejecting its leadership. Some may have voted through party loyalty, local interest, or uncertainty. But the collective result is unambiguous. The political leadership and the bank no longer had the same fate. In 1915, the bank had been an idea attached to a movement. In 1919, it became a law and an operating institution. It held state money, it made loans, it employed people, it created relationships and expectations. It had also been approved once already by referendum. By 1921, abolishing it was not the same action as rejecting the men who governed it. The League had lost control of the story, but it had succeeded in making its bank real enough that the voters had to judge it separately. The vote explains that BND survived the immediate attempt to dissolve it. It does not explain why the bank remained for another century. Legal survival was only the first requirement. The bank still needed competent management, useful programs, political acceptance, and a place inside a financial system dominated by private institutions. Its design supplied one source of durability. State funds had to be deposited there. That made BND the state's fiscal agent and gave it a relationship to public money that did not depend on winning retail customers one account at a time. But mandatory deposits alone do not create legitimacy. A public institution can possess money and still become a permanent political target. The more important adaptation was the bank's relationship with local finance. BND gradually became less threatening when it acted less like a state-backed chain competing for every customer, and more like a partner that could extend the capacity of community banks and credit unions. Consider a local business seeking financing. The local bank knows the borrower and the community, but it may not want to carry the entire loan on its own balance sheet. BND can participate, taking a share of the loan while the local institution remains the lead relationship. The borrower does not necessarily walk into a Bank of North Dakota branch. There are no public branches across the state. The state bank can sit behind the local bank, sharing risk and making a larger loan possible. This is not the simple picture supporters or opponents might have imagined in 1919. It is still public banking. The state owns the institution, state deposits support it, and public purposes shape its mission. But it often works through private institutions rather than around them. That arrangement turns potential enemies into participants. BND also changed because North Dakota changed. The state moved through agricultural depression, widespread bank failures, the Great Depression, war, post-war development, oil booms and busts, floods, droughts, and repeated changes in banking technology. No institution survives that range of conditions by repeating its founding moment forever. The bank supported farm lending and economic development. It became involved in student loans. It helped administer relief and special programs. Legislatures transferred profits or directed resources towards state purposes. Each activity created new arguments about what the bank should do. Each also created a constituency that encountered BND not as an old League symbol, but as a working institution. This is how political identity can fade without ownership changing. The bank remained owned, controlled, and operated by the state. Its legal purpose still referred to agriculture, commerce, and industry. The Industrial Commission still governed it. Yet the meaning of those facts shifted. To the Nonpartisan League, the bank was part of an insurgent program to break economic dependence. To later governments, it could be a source of liquidity, a development tool, a partner in disaster response, a holder of public deposits, or a contributor to state finances. The institution became broader than the coalition that created it. That is the deeper answer to the 1921 vote. Voters did not have to preserve the League in order to preserve one League achievement. Later administrations did not have to inherit Townley's politics in order to find the bank useful. The movement had designed a political weapon. Time converted it into a utility. Today, the Bank of North Dakota is still unlike an ordinary retail bank. It does not operate a statewide network of branches. It does not market checking accounts and credit cards to the general public in the usual way. Student loans are an important direct public exception, but businesses and farmers normally begin with a local financial institution. The bank's distinctive power is its position. North Dakota law says the state will maintain a banking system that it owns, controls, and operates. State funds must be deposited there. The Industrial Commission manages the institution on behalf of the state. That gives BND a public deposit base and a statewide mission. It can participate with local banks, support lending programs, hold public funds, and respond when the legislature or state government creates a financial program. According to BND's 2025 annual report, the bank ended that year with $10.7 billion in assets and reported $231.8 million in net income. Those are the bank's own figures, and size alone does not prove public value, but they make one fact impossible to dismiss. This is not a surviving name attached to an empty office. It is a substantial operating financial institution. The modern arrangement also clarifies what the title does not mean. North Dakota is not the only place in America with a public financial authority, a municipal lending program, or a government-supported credit institution. It is the only state that owns and operates a bank of this kind. Other states owned banks in the 19th century. Those institutions disappeared. Many proposals for new state banks have been debated since. None has produced another surviving equivalent. So the map remains simple. 50 states, one state-owned bank. The Bank of North Dakota is often used as evidence in modern political arguments. Supporters of public banking present it as proof that government ownership can endure and earn money. Critics warn that one unusual state, with one unusual history, cannot be copied as a universal model. Both positions can miss what made the institution survive. BND was not dropped into North Dakota as a neutral technical solution. It came from years of economic grievance, unusually effective organizing, control of state government, a specific constitutional and legal environment, and a direct fight before the voters. It was nearly abolished. Then it adapted. Its survival does not prove that every state should own a bank. It proves something narrower and more interesting. Ownership was only the beginning. The durable institution was the one that found a role inside the system around it. Townley organized farmers to challenge distant financial power. Frazier signed the bank into law. The Nonpartisan League built the machinery. Their opponents removed the men who controlled it. But when voters were asked to destroy the machinery too, they stopped short. That choice gave the bank time to become a fiscal agent, time to partner with the local banks it might otherwise have displaced, time to serve new purposes that its founders could not have predicted, and time to become so established that its most radical feature could hide in plain sight. North Dakota does not own the nation's only state-owned bank because the political revolution of 1919 never ended. It owns the bank because the revolution built something that learned how to live after the revolutionaries lost. The movement disappeared from power. The bank became infrastructure. And on a map of 50 states, North Dakota is still the one marked in red.